Good morning, viewers. This is CEC-UGC network, and we are running at this time a program called Indian Writing English Translation. And the topic today is Bhakti Poetry, ANDAL and AKKA. The lecture will be delivered by Dr. Nagpal, Payal Nagpal. Let me tell about Dr. Payal Nagpal. She has taught English literature in Delhi University. The college is Janki Devi Memorial College in the Department of English, and she has researched on topics of contemporary interest, and she has also given lectures on Indian writing in English in the previous series that we were running. Today's lecture, as I already told you, is Bhakti Poetry, ANDAL and AKKA, and she will be speaking for the first 50 minutes, and then in the last 10 minutes you will have questions to ask. If you want to ask questions, you can, there is a toll-free number with us, that is 1-800-110430. I repeat, the toll-free number is 1-800-110430. So now I request Dr. Payal Nagpal to begin the lecture. Welcome, Dr. Nagpal, and please give the lecture.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. Today's lecture will be on two Bhakti poets, women Bhakti poets from the south, ANDAL and Mahadevi Akka. Akka Mahadevi or Mahadevi Akka as she is known. If you look at ANDAL's poetry and work, she belongs to the 9th century and is a mystic poet from Tamil Nadu. And as a girl, she was, as a very young girl, she was known as Kottai, meaning garland, and was born in a place called Shiviliputtur. She was found by Vishnu Chittan or Periyalvar, as he was known as, and her father, her foster father, that is Periyalvar, was also a medieval Bhakti poet saint. And he was also he used to prepare garlands for the deity, and this is they were all part of the Alvar sect that was into Vaishnavite worship, and they worship Vishnu, known as Thirumal, the sacred dark one. So in Tamil Nadu, they were, at that point of time, they were the Shiva worshipping Nayanars and the Vaishnavite Alvars. And Andal, of course, with the foster father being Periyalvar, was a worshipper of Vishnu and part of the Vaishnavite sect. She was also very young in the sense that, we are looking at a poet, a Bhakti poet, a saint, who was very, very young. She was about 12, 13 years of age by the time she writes everything, and by the time we have her poetry. And it is believed that at a very early age, she merged with her god at the temple in Srirangam. This is again as far as legend goes and hagiographical accounts about the Bhakti poet go. So there's very little that we know about Andal, and so what we know of her is from her verses, is from her poetry, and she instead she used her mother tongue as against the established Sanskrit, or her verses are also actually in Old Tamil, the ancient Tamil, rather than the version that was being used then. So there are two works that can be attributed to Andal. One is Tirupavai, which is translated as The Path to Krishna, and Nachyar Tirumuli, which is the sacred songs of the lady. And we know, and at this level we encounter two problems. One is, of course, translation from Tamil to English, and the other is the fact that very little is, in a sense, known about Andal. So if we look at her work, her work is in the form of songs, which meant this is poetry that is meant to be sung. We know that most medieval Bhakti poets, and especially the women, they also sang. A lot of them, like Mirabai, would also, she would totally go into a trance and also dance. So when we look at Andal's work, especially the Path to Krishna or the sacred songs of the lady, we are looking at what are called the Pasurams, and these are songs. And the legend is that, whatever she spoke about was meant to be sung. And her father used to prepare garlands for the deity. On one particular day, and this is the most famous legend around Andal's life that we have, he caught Andal wearing the garland that he was actually supposed to offer to the deity. So that night he does not offer the garland to the deity, and in his dream it seems Vishnu appears and said that he preferred Andal's garland. And the whole idea of Andal as being betrothed to the deity begins at that point. And she rejects, of course, marriage to any mortal man. And Andal too composed in Chen, or Old Tamil as it's called, and however she does not follow all the conventions that are there. So this idea of a language that is in vogue is being used, and a rejection of that language, or only a part usage of that language, is very important here. So an interesting aspect that is brought forth by her translators of Andal's work, like Priya Sarukai and Ravi Shankar. What they say is that ancient Tamil also relied on the ability of the listener, in a sense, to complete the poem, or a kind of loop that is created. And this loop is, it's a participatory model that's there, and this loop is completed only once the perceptions of the listener are actually attached to the work. So if we look at, the Path to Krishna, it's a long narrative poem. It has about 30 stanzas, and it begins by, mentioning the month of Markali, or the month of January, Feb, where the girls bathe before dawn to pray for a good husband. Now, this is entirely in the tradition, actually, if you look at it, the Path to Krishna is entirely in the tradition of the relationship between Krishna and the gopis. And she looks at herself as a gopi, and the sense of community with other gopis, and the community of women is very, very strong here, and how they are all collectively vying for the attention of Krishna is important. So for instance, there is, this is from the Path to Krishna. She says, let's bathe, dear gopis, sing hymns to our Pati, relish this land with our loosened limbs, embody the bliss of simply being together with the son of Nandagopa. So in this, the whole idea is that not just Andal, but all the gopis seek the attention of Krishna. And again, the erotic, the sensuous, the fact that the body is a very important part of this particular poetry is stressed here. So for instance, relish this land with our loosened limbs and embody the bliss of simply being together. So all the gopis, they seek the attention of Krishna, and this is there is a steady progression in this, and from inviting all the gopis to be together, to looking out for Krishna. So it just moves from one thing to the other. And Krishna, of course, is referred to in all his various forms. One who steals ghee, but here too, Andal qualifies this. It's not just somebody who steals ghee. She says, one who steals ghee from my mouth as blessing. And so she immediately manages to straddle both aspects. One of the individual, Andal as individual seeking Krishna's attention, and yet at the same time the commonality of it, that she is one with the other gopis and they all seek Krishna's attention. Krishna is also referred to as king of eternal Mathura of the north, peacock of the woods. So we see that Andal makes very good use of nature imagery here, and her ability to weave into words in the form of the Pasuram, the idea that this poetry is something that is going to be that bond in a sense between herself and Krishna. Here again, I would request Professor Prakash to comment on Andal's poetry and the fact that she is also a very young poet who's doing this.
I think the point that you make about the innocence of the person, because she is very young, I think that helps her become, as you say, a kind of part of the group to which she belongs, and that group is all the gopis. So all the gopis stand on one side and Krishna is on the other. At the same time, as she grows up, we talked about progression in relationship, she realizes that she has a kind of a thing to do with Krishna himself. So this dual part, this interests me, that she is an individual as well as she has some kind of connection with the rest of the gopis. Right. And she is not very jealous of them. As she is a beloved or lover of Krishna, so are the other gopis. That's one part. And secondly, that she is directly face to face in relationship with gopi, so with Krishna. So that is a very interesting point, and this is not there in the case of other bhakti poets. For instance, Meera. Yeah. Meera was directly responding to Krishna. She is responding both to the sakhis or the gopis on one side and Krishna on the other. Yes. So I really find it very fascinating.
Yes, in fact it's specifically so in the case of the path to Krishna, because it is here that this sense of being with the Sakhi Bhav or being with the other gopis is there, and of course it evolves into a more mature sentiment in her next work. So this is also the earlier work. So as you rightly said that maybe the innocence or the fact that she's also a very young bhakti saint in that sense. I think these two factors really play a very important role here.
And what about the nature part that you're talking about? I mean, she is using natural imagery to express her desires, express her bodily wishes and all. What is the case?
Yes, in every aspect. Both at the level of her own desire and at the level of descriptions of Krishna. I think there particularly she's locating his vision in terms of varied aspects of nature. So there, for instance, he is referred to as peacock of the woods, or somebody who steals ghee from my mouth. So both legend and nature imagery, the natural imagery. These are two factors.
Which means her gaze is not merely on herself, but also on Krishna.
Yes.
So it's a lover who is active in that sense, that she is imagining her company with Krishna in terms of an individual which on which she or whom she gazes. Is that the question?
Yes.
The gaze is both divided between herself and the gaze at Krishna.
At Krishna. And not only at herself, but also descriptions of the gopis and so on. So it works at these three levels, in fact, if you look at it. At the level of...
Please dilate it. Yes. I think this is a good point you're making.
So if you look at these three levels, one would of course be her companionship with the gopis, and how it's not as if she sees herself as separate from these gopis and wants to be an individual who needs to be looked at separately, but she's one with them. So this community of these young girls who are together, who are bathing, so that's one part of it. Then of course she's conscious of her own sentiment. This the self in bhakti poetry in any case is very important, and she's conscious of this, and yet at the same time this self merges with the other friends to seek companionship with Krishna. So if we look at further examples of sensuousness in her poetry, then there are these beautiful lines that the udders of the buffaloes are bursting with milk, just thinking of their calves. They wet the floor with hopefulness, the same fervor that grips us as we knock on your door. So when we talk about imagery and images that she seeks from nature, it's all around. It's from her immediate context. So the buffaloes, the bursting with milk, or the calves, and this is seen as a sign of hope, optimism that she too seeks in terms of her relationship with Krishna. If you look at her, the point that I've been making about her companionship with the other gopis and with the other young girls, she writes, "O splendid Govinda, for we drape ourselves." In fact, it's not the I. It's not, she never says that it's I who drape myself. It's always we. So, how all of them are together waiting for Krishna. So she says, we drape ourselves in silk, pin our hair, put on earrings and anklets, steep rice in so much ghee, it drips down elbows. So much sweetness, this life. So at each point we can mark that this unity with other women, and together it's always expressed through images from objects, events and things that are there in her day-to-day life. And for instance, as I said, the milk or the ghee dripping down elbows. And these are all very, very sensuous images that are there. And this is looked at as sweetness in life.
So, one has buffaloes, one has the woman's body, one has the person working in one's courtyard and doing milk and all those things, and one is at the same time thinking of Krishna. So, this kind of sensuousness that comes from ordinary details of life,
yes,
that merges with the desires of the body of the poet.
Yes.
I think that's once again something that viewers would like to think about and take inspiration from.
Yes. In fact, her second work is very interesting. It's called The Sacred Songs of the Lady, and I think the two words that we really need to keep keep at the back of our minds, are sacred and lady. So the very first song, if we look at the titles of these songs, the very first song is Song to Kamdev. It's a series of about 14 songs, and the first is a song to Kamdev and the god of love. This next is Song of Sandcastles, then there is a song for the clothes, Circle, Song of the Koil. She talks about her dreams. I dreamt this dream, my friend. The white conch from the fathomless sea. Dark rain clouds, be my messenger. In the grove of my lord, dark flowers, take me to the land, Kanan, my lord, and so on. And finally the last one being the Song of Questions and Answers. So it's a sequence of about 14 songs, and we need to understand how the sacred is interpreted in these songs, where the sacred is totally secular in form and nature, in the sense that the sacred is not something that means denial. The sacred is a complete devotion, a complete abandonment, in a sense, of the body, of the mind to Krishna. So, and she begins by pleading to Kamdev and says that, don't forget all month I've delighted your eyes and satiated your ears with exaltation, god of lust. Devoted, love drenched, lambent as dawn, I've opened my heart to you. Now, in these lines, of course these are very sensuous lines and so on, we can see a marked shift from her first work, which is The Path to Krishna, to the second one, which is the Sacred Songs of the Lady, where we realize that the kind of playfulness and objectivity that is there in the first work, which is The Path to Krishna, translates, I will not say that it's not here, but it evolves into a more mature, slightly more mature version, where the idea of the sensuous is certainly more evolved in the context of the Sacred Songs of the Lady. And here, from all the gopis, here the I is also something that emerges differently. So, from we of the gopis and how she is with her friends, here we have, don't forget all month I've delighted your eyes, is what she says. So, and in fact she pleads to Kamdev and says, do you even take notice of my obsession? And says that from childhood I have pledged. So, and she expresses her own body. So, where we have images from ordinary life, day-to-day life, nature, which are a central part of the first work, The Path to Krishna, and the body is also a part of that work, but in a very different manner. But
while I'd like to interrupt and would request you to tell the difference between the sensuous and that which is to do with knowledge, or which is so the kind of gap that is there. Secondly, what exactly is sensuous, and how through sensuousness one can express one's emotions as well as one's awareness of the world in which one lives.
Right.
So that is a very important thing, and viewers would like to know as to what exactly sensuousness means.
So, I think when we talk about sensuousness, we are in a sense looking at her understanding of the world and the self through poetry, in a form that involves that involves not just the body but every aspect of her being. So, every aspect of her being a part of this world, and that in that the body forms a very, very important part. So, we must not, the erotic is certainly a very important aspect of the sensuous, but the sensuous will be this understanding and hope, optimism, infusion of life, the erotic, everything together, I think would constitute that. And this is something that is extremely evolved in a sense in the Sacred Songs of the Lady.
Which means one can also understand the world around oneself through the awareness of the senses.
Yes.
No, not merely awareness that comes at the level of mind.
No. It would involve both, in the sense that, we are looking at the awareness of the senses, whatever senses we perceive through the body, and of course, how it translates into whether into poetry or any other form of understanding in the mind. So
good in life means that you should be able to feel happiness there, sweetness there, and that sweetness and sounds and all those things, lyricism for instance,
Yes.
all these things combine to tell you about the world in which you live, and that world is a good world to inhabit.
I mean, in fact, this is a sequence of songs. So if the title is The Sacred Songs of the Lady, and the word lady here is also interesting, because it also in that sense touches on varied aspects of life, and we've been using the word sensuous, so and what it means for a woman. So I think that is something that is very well sketched out, and a very evolved sense of it, I think, in these 14 songs that Andal has.
So it's not merely dry reason, dry rationality, it is also that one keeps one's ears and eyes open,
Yes.
and whatever is good around is captured through images.
Captured.
That's what sensuousness is.
Yes.
And there the role of women in the Bhakti poetry is important.
Is important, very important.
That's a very good point you're making, I'm sure. Yes.
So, in fact, as just mentioned that, she pleads to Kamdev when she says that, do you even take notice of my obsession? And she mentions how from childhood she has pledged that, she would, that all that in time would ripen and swell to the one and only Lord of Dwarka. I beg unite me with him. My surging breasts long to leap to the touch of his hand, which holds aloft the flaming discus and the conch. So the playfulness, as I said, that even in the path to Krishna, she seeks, along with the other gopis, she seeks the attention and seeks union with Krishna. But here, that sentiment is more pronounced, because we understand it in terms of the description of the body and the longing that she experiences for Krishna. So from song to Kamdev, she moves on to the song of the sandcastles, and then there is a reference to the conch, where she says that we've varied our wrists thick with bangles, even as you lounge on approaching and receding waves, laughing no doubt, don't wreck our sandcastles. So the feeling that Krishna has this ability to destroy the sandcastles that they have painfully made, and sandcastles, of course, express very well the imagination that Andal has. That's one aspect of it, and the other aspect is the realization that it is a sandcastle after all, and it might very easily, just at the slightest of touch, it might just collapse. But for this too, she almost chides Krishna when she says that don't wreck our sandcastles. So she continues to also at times use the image of herself as the innocent one, and the innocent children still unripened, and seeking the attention, as I said, of Krishna. So the playfulness can well be seen when she says that if our mothers catch us, we will be banished from home, when Krishna takes away their clothes and the gopis are bathing. So she mentions how and this statement is very important and insightful when she says, if our mothers catch us, we will be banished from home. So there is this realization here again that the society is totally averse, in a sense, to this. And she says that I dreamt this dream, my friend, on marriage rituals. And she mentions twirling jasmines and stunning peacocks, rain clouds, glorious peacocks. So we need to understand Andal's poetry, one, in terms of this transition from a very young girl, and of course she remains a teenage poet and so on, and she merges into the
so
image.
The mother is a controlling figure then, because she's afraid of it.
In fact, I was just going to mention this, that the established norms of the society are seen as totally averse to the expression of this kind of sensuousness and development of the sensuousness. So she says, for instance, that if the mothers get to know about this, then they will be banished, or if the neighbors get to know, she says, they will all think that I am crazy for a feeling that does not exist for them.
So neighborhood, matrimony, all these things go against sensuousness.
Yes.
And when one uses sensuousness, that's a kind of assertion against these controlling forces.
Absolutely. In fact, the most insightful are these lines when she says that if word gets around that I left my parents, skipped from home a stone across the far pond, it will be too late to salvage my reputation. But the divine has bared his utter nature to me. So,
what is reputation then? Reputation is that kind of consideration which compels these people to follow a certain path, a certain norm, and not be themselves.
Absolutely.
So reputation that way is a negative term. Yeah.
It's
something
totally,
like honor.
Yes, honor. Yes. So it's totally negative, and both the, I mean, if we look at these three factors that are brought in here, one is of the immediate family, the second is of the neighbors, and the third is about reputation. So all these things are seen as totally averse to the development of sensuousness in women and in ANDAL here. So and however, the idea in Bhakti poetry is that it is the divine, and this love is something that is worth every bit of it. So even if she has to actually go against the immediate family, neighborhood, and forego her reputation, so she is going to take that leap of faith and be with Krishna. So in the last song, how there is a kind of pulling back in a sense into the context and accepted dimensions maybe of Bhakti poetry. It's in the question answer format, and she sees Krishna also as someone who illumines and who brings in that process of realization. So for ANDAL, in that sense, if you look at her, understand her through her poetry, Bhakti poetry then allows expression, allows freedom, allows the development of herself that is totally free of all these shackles. And the final thing is to feel totally illuminated, and this illumination is through Krishna. So with this, I hope you enjoyed this lecture on ANDAL and her poetry. Welcome viewers to this lecture on women Bhakti poets from the South. We've already discussed ANDAL and her poetry. This part of the lecture is going to be on the poetry of Mahadevi Akka. When we look at Mahadevi Akka's work, certain things that we know about her from various accounts are that she was born somewhere around the 12th century in Shivamoga in Karnataka, and she was initiated at the age of 10 into the worship of Shiva. The form of Shiva that Mahadevi Akka worships is Chenna Mallikarjun, as in the Lord white as jasmine. And in fact, that's the signature line in all her poetry, that whatever she writes, it ends with Lord white as jasmine. There is this legend, again through various accounts, there is a probability that the king of the place, King Kaushika, was totally besotted by her, and she did get married to him, and however she finally left him and joined the company of saints and the Bhakti poets, that is. And here Alamma is her guru, and however, when she leaves her family, when she leaves her immediate family, she leaves her marriage, and she seeks refuge with Alamma. It's not as if she is taken immediately, but there is a kind of dialogue that ensues, that follows between Alamma and Mahadevi, and after which he, of course, takes her within the fold of the saints of this period. And it is with this that a second journey of her life begins. So, and this is something that we will be discussing towards the end of this lecture, about what are the points of commonality that we can evolve. For instance, we've had discussions on Lal Ded, Mirabai, Andal, and now Mahadevi Akka. So, can we really deduce, that there are certain factors that are common in a sense to these women poets? So, and finally, what we know about Mahadevi Akka is that, and Akka here is being the eldest. And within the Veerashaiva, she's part of the Veerashaiva sect, and there was this idea of be referring to each other as the elder one. So Sri Shaila is the place where it is believed that she finally merged with her idea of Shiva and God. Now she writes in the form of the vachanas, and the vachanas are the bhakti poems of personal devotion to a god or a specific form of that god. And the vachana, in the what happens is it rejects not only the traditional form of Vedic religion, but also as A.K. Ramanujan points out, that the little local traditions are also in a sense redone, because they not only, the vachanas not only scorn the effectiveness, he says, of Vedas as scripture, but they also reject the little legends of gods and goddesses. And in that sense, the vachanas are opposed also to both Shruti and Smriti. It's not only what is remembered and received, but in bhakti poetry what is important is what is uttered in the here and the now. And this form of utterance, I think, is very, very important, especially in understanding that we are looking at women bhakti poets, because for women to come up with these utterances is a very, very significant aspect. And most of these vachanas, they are in the form of the tripadi, or what are the three-line stanzaic form, and do not follow any meter as such. So when we say that the traditional and the local traditions are done away with, I think the point that Ramanujan is trying to make is that any kind of premeditated art or any kind of technique or mechanical form is rejected, and the bhakti poet in that sense is free to evolve specifically his or her own style, and that is precisely where we also locate Mahadevi Akka's work. So and at the same time there is this cry for some kind of spontaneity, and of course the characteristic feature certainly is that it ends with the signature line, which refers to the god or the deity that the poet is looking at. So I think here I would request Professor Prakash also to just comment on especially this idea that the vachana is something which is not just remembered or received, but what is uttered in the here and the now, and the idea of utterance.
I think it's a very important point that you are making, because generally the bhakti poet would take inspiration from somewhere, and then simply send it out to the audience. But this particular poet is in a way interpreting whatever she has heard. So maybe the Shrutis are there, the Smritis are there, the Vedas are there, the wisdom of the Shastras is there. But then when the person has comprehended them, assimilated them, then one has in the meantime mixed that with one's own experience. And then one utters. You use the word correctly. The word utter means that there is a kind of composition. And the composition is the form. And then the art form where there are three lines, and in these three lines the vachan or vachana as you pronounce it, and then that vachana then will be able to formulate for the benefit of the audience as to what the person, the author himself or herself is saying. So it's a bhakti of a different kind. There is a lot of knowledge here, lot of cognition is there, and I'm sure that this kind of bhakti poetry will relate at two levels. One at the level of Andal where she'll be feeling happy, and the other at the level of realization, where she'll be thinking. So this is how am I right in,
Yes,
in
absolutely. In
interpreting
fact,
this?
the word, the vachanas or the vachan itself is the utterance. So that kind of puts forth the whole idea, and I felt that, especially because these are women poets, and we are talking about, in the case of Andal it's the 9th century, and in the case of Mahadevi it is the 12th century. So there is at that point of time for these women to actually express themselves in an uninhibited sort of manner, for that utterance to be realized. I think that's quite an achievement.
So that utterance is assertion.
Assertion.
Because she is able to compose things for herself. And does she have the audience also in mind when she's uttering these things? Because there are expectations from the audience that this is what the poet is telling us.
I think the fact that both Andal and Mahadevi Akka, they both refer to the institutions of family, marriage and society and so on. So I'm sure that they were conscious of the fact that there would be people listening to them, and there will be people who would be probably opposing to all these things that they are saying. But they went ahead very boldly and said what they had to.
Maybe the audience comprised of women themselves. So the women would be able to relate to them at the level of criticism of the family.
Yes.
But then there might be men with whom women later on would share, and therefore they come back with that kind of restriction in their. What do you say to this?
The audience certainly is a mixed audience, because for instance, when she's taken another wing of Alamma, I think there too she's in the company of the saints. So it's both men and women. So these are the saints, and but the listeners then would also be both men and women in that sense. So for them at that time to make these bold utterances certainly must have made quite
and the institution of sainthood would also lend some kind of respectability to the utterance. When saints are hearing, when saints are saying, and people have faith in them, therefore the people would be critical of what they otherwise hear as norms.
Yes.
So on one side are the saints who make it sacred, and the word sacred is important in the case of Andal, and that sacredness is there because here the god Shiva also is invoked. So which means that it's a mixed kind of affair, and the person is able to negotiate one's path through these different things. That one thinks, or one talks, and one also hears and reads, something like this.
And I think this is an important point about the utterance can also be related to the fact that when we look at the Virashaiva movement, and the worshippers of Shiva. So one of the features was, of course, that it's a kind of dualistic monism, in the sense that the idea of Shiva as both here and beyond. So both the worlds, and yet at the same time the fact that he is here makes it a kind of monistic aspect. So but more important than this, I think, is the fact that these saints were from different social groups, different occupations. So not just the fact that for Mahadevi Akka this was a bold utterance, but the fact that they were from different walks of life, from different social groups, as I said, and different occupations that that they were a part of. I think that made it very, very significant makes it significant for us to understand the Virashaiva movement. And the saints then form their own separate family, in a sense, a family that runs counter in that sense to the established norms of what a family is to be about. So and especially in the context of the Virashaiva movement, the focus is on the worshipping subject. And so when we look at Mahadevi, the focus is on Mahadevi Akka's understanding of herself and her understanding of the world around her. What are the inner movements, and what are her own trials that she undergoes in her search for the Lord White as Jasmine. So I think a classic example is a very famous vachan by Mahadevi Akka. It goes like this: I have Maya for mother-in-law, the world for father-in-law, 3 brothers-in-law like tigers, and the husband's thoughts are full of laughing women. No God, this man, and I cannot cross the sister-in-law, but I will give this wench the slip, and go cuckold my husband with Hara my lord, and I will make him my good husband. So this works at various levels. first of all, of course, there is the whole philosophical dimension about the mother-in-law representing Maya, and the world, of course, is represented, the worldliness in a sense, by the father-in-law, and kind of power and aggression through the brothers-in-law and so on. But she rejects all this, and which means that she rejects the worldliness, she rejects the ways of the world, and she says that she is going to cuckold her husband, in the sense that this is not the husband that is really meant for her. The good husband is the God. The good husband is Lord, and in this case it is the form of Shiva that she worships. So the love that she has for Shiva is something that is totally against the established structures that are there. So in that sense, this composite unit of the family that is kind of created through the various personas of the mother-in-law, father-in-law, and husband and brother-in-law, sister-in-law. So she says that she is going to abandon all this, and she is going to seek love that is only meant for her true husband, and that true husband is Shiva. So in fact, the idea is that she is looking not for a husband who will be God, but for a God who will be both her lover and her husband. And so this idea of love is free of social shackles. And here again, Professor Prakash introduced, this is a very interesting vachan, I think, that we have by Mahadevi.
Yes, and see the play on the words, the true husband and the real husband. Real husband is one who carries the influences of the world, which is unreal in the other sense, which is repressive, which is restrictive, and because there is no love in the world, the actual world. But in the true world, there is love, and that love, makes Shiva, for instance, a better husband, the good husband, as you call it, than the one that the world has to offer. And the decisive point is love. That in one, love is not there, there are restrictions, there are responsibilities, there are pressures. In the other, there is freedom. So freedom and love on one side, they decide the path of fulfillment for this poet. And this is a kind of freedom, and she is saying all this in the 12th century.
Yes.
Century, which has feudalism as a structure, where there are hierarchies.
Yes.
But these women, on their own, are able to break those shackles and think of a world which is informed by love.
Yes, and the whole idea, what is really goodness, and who is the good husband in that sense. So for her, it is certainly somebody who is not mediating all these institutions in coming to her. It is somebody who comes freely, spontaneously, and is not, as I said, mediating or negotiating his love through these structures.
Who is celebrating, who is playful, who is giving a sense of friendship, equality. These are what define love, which is there in the case of deity as the lover. But
and also for Mahadevi Akka, then what it really means is that within these forms and structures, this kind of love and the whole idea of the true husband or the good husband is not possible. It has to come outside of this structure. It is not possible within this, and which is what she seeks in the divine.
Which means the Mahadevi Akka, a kind of syndrome that we have in the 12th century, is more freedom oriented.
Yes.
And more criticism oriented.
Yes.
than the case was with the previous poet.
Yes.
Because she wants to critique, she wants to reject, she wants to draw a clear line of distinction between what exists in the name of relationship and what would have been possible if one thought of it as a kind of ideal.
Yes.
So,
and with Mahadevi Akka also, she's a very young poet. She's I think she, as legend would have it, she lives only probably till about her 20s, and one doesn't know of much about her beyond that. But certainly older than Andal, maybe in that sense, but the fact that she is able to understand so much and is able to identify the problems that are there around her.
And the quotations we are given here, the quotations from her poetry, those quotations carry fewer images than Andal did.
Yes.
Because she is in a way interpreting and she is giving ideas.
Yes.
She is telling us clearly what is wrong and what is right.
Yes.
Andal was enjoying herself. Andal was asserting herself at the level of the senses. Now this person is also able to see things clearly and shift the verse from the others.
Yes, And certainly Andal's poetry is more sensuous as compared to Mahadevi Akka's, but then Mahadevi Akka's concerns are also different, slightly different. And she is somebody, unlike Andal, who does not get married to any earthly mortal. Here she probably, legend as I said has it that she did get married, but she walked away from that marriage and she left it totally for this new life, this world of saints that she was a part of.
So marrying a person as husband and then leaving him,
Yes.
and then joining with God. This what makes her a distinct kind of an entity
Yes.
among the poets of devotion.
Yes. There's a call from Varanasi.
Yes, please ask the question.
Hello, sir.
Please
Good
identify
afternoon,
yourself.
sir. Good afternoon,
Tell your
ma'am.
name. Tell
Good
where you are
afternoon.
from.
Yes, please tell.
My question is,
Yes, we can hear you.
my
Please
name
tell
is
us.
Pawan Giri. I am calling from Varanasi.
Yes.
Yes, please
Hello.
speak.
Yes, please tell us. We can hear you. Please ask your question.
Hello, sir. My question is, how relevant the bhakti of Andal and Akka is relevant today?
That's a good question.
Yes. The question that Pavan from Varanasi has asked is, how relevant is the bhakti poetry of Andal and Mahadevi Akka in today's world? So, I think if we totally translate whatever we are studying in the context of the 9th century or the 12th century, the case of Andal and Mahadevi Akka. So, this is absolutely relevant today. And today I think, the divine love that both Andal and Mahadevi Akka are seeking, one for Krishna and the other for Shiva, we can translate that very beautifully in today's world to a kind of the need for humanitarian love, the need for a kind of humanity to prevail. And that humanity has to surpass all these structures that can be seen as restrictive, that can be seen as inhibiting, and that hold us back, from relating to other human beings. So, this aspect is really speaking very, very significant and important, because if there is something that we have to learn and we have to apply in the modern context, I think it is this.
Yes. Dr. Pal Nagpal, I also would like to add something in response to this question. It was a good question, because unless we understand the relevance of these two poets to our circumstances, we should not be discussing them in detail. So, I would like to add one thing to what you have said already, and I think that's a very clear answer, is that today's life is full of problems, and that always we think of answers, and these answers come from different directions. Now, one answer is that we should put up with whatever we see. The other answer is that we dream about an ideal which later on can become possible for us. And these poets are making available to us that ideal of freedom, that ideal of self-respect, that ideal of assertion as an individual. So, Pawan, you have asked a good question, and I hope your question is to some extent answered. Yes, please.
So, getting back to this discussion about Mahadevi Akka's poetry, so we've been talking about how it works against certain established and entrenched structures. So, some more aspects of Mahadevi Akka's poetry. For instance, in one of her vachanas, she says, "My body is dirt, my spirit is space. Which shall I grab, O Lord? Cut through my illusions." So, the understanding that one's life is mired in all sorts of problems, and she seeks union with Shiva, so that these illusions that we nurture about this world, those illusions are done away with. And she says elsewhere that illusion has troubled body as shadow, illusion herds the worlds. So that we are all moved in a sense. We often use the idea of illusion for this particular world, that this world is illusory. But what is the nature of that illusion is what Mahadevi Akka tries to contend with. She tries to understand that, she grapples with it. And her answer to that is, of course, the divine and Shiva, right? So, and she says that, cut through my heart's greeds, that we are, when we talk about the factor of illusion in this world, then greed is certainly one of them. And the structures that we have evolved, they contribute to this kind of illusion. And she seeks a way out. She says, show me a way out. There is again in her poetry also, references to nature, for instance, twittering birds and swans, high singing quolls, swooping bees, peacocks and so on. But they are, if I compare Mahadevi Akka's poetry with Andal's, then certainly this is, they are few in number, and they are also kind of part of another context that's built up. So wherefore Andal, it's totally within the sensuous context. Here the critique of the society is, I think, very important. So she totally rejects the earthly husband when she says, I love the handsome one, he has no death, decay nor form. Take these husbands who die, decay, and feed them to your kitchen fires. So this is a totally blatant rejection of the figure of the husband and what he represents, which is the institution of marriage. So instead she pines for her for Shiva, and her love is for Shiva. So that is in a sense directed towards, as I said, a kind of freedom. I would request Professor Prakash to especially comment on this one.
Well, I think here this poet is able to see the essence of, and the essence is negative of the matrimony that exists at that time, because it's full of structures, and these structures impinge on the freedom of the woman, and the woman is only a half citizen in that state, because she is confined totally to the norms of matrimony. So she wants to break free from this. So that's once again an expression of freedom. There's another question that I'd like to raise, and please give your response to this on the basis of what you have already said. Andal was in the 9th century. This Mahadevi Akka was in the 12th century, and in the 15th, 16th centuries we have Meera. And there is a kind of a chain that can be made with these three poets, one, the second, and the third. So how would these two poets form a kind of background to what Meera would be saying in the 15th, 16th centuries? So this is what I thought should be addressed.
In fact, this is actually something that I'm just going to take up in the last part, and if I can just finish this particular point about Mahadevi Akka's poetry, which was regarding the institution of marriage, and where she again talks about how other men are thorn under the smooth leaf. I cannot touch them, go near them, nor trust them. And she says, I cannot take any man in my arms but my Lord, white as jasmine. So here again, the kind of sensuousness that we've been talking about in the context of Andal can be seen in the case of Mahadevi Akka also. And she says that he's battered my heart and looted my flesh, and I'm the woman of love for my Lord, white as jasmine. So we see a kind of sensuousness that is built in Mahadevi Akka's poetry also. But to get back to the point that the question that Professor Prakash raised, that here I will now try to evolve some commonalities in a sense, to the different poets who are of this particular time period. So as you rightly said, from Andal in the 9th century to Mahadevi Akka of the 12th century, and then we have Lal Ded in Kashmir, and we are talking about two Shaivites here, because we have Mahadevi Akka, who's from the south, and she's a Veerashaiva saint, and when we look at Lal Ded, two aspects. One, she's a Trika Shaivite, when if you have to pin her in the context of Shaivism, and she's also there at the point of the influx of Sufism. And moving on from there, we have Mirabai, 3 centuries later. So a commonality that we can kind of deduce, I think, in 3 of these poets, that's Mahadevi Akka and Lal Ded and Mirabai, all 3 reject the institution of marriage. Andal also rejects the same, but because she, as legend has it, she just probably she never got married, and her marriage was to Krishna. So then this idea of initiation to a higher state, the idea of initiation to a higher life, is there in all these poets. And again, a very, very important factor that is common to these poets is this idea of sensuousness. So I mean, if we actually trace it back to Andal, then we can see how Andal is actually triggering or preparing the base for the kind of poetry that we have in the south in Mahadevi Akka, and right up to Kashmir we have Lal Ded, and then of course Mirabai. So the kind of divine love that we are talking about in the context of these women poets is something that seeks freedom. It's something that seeks expression, and freedom and expression that is away and totally above structures that bind them, structures that hold them back and restrict them and kind of predefine their roles. So this is how I would probably look at these women bhakti poets. So if you just comment on this aspect.
You may conclude, and then maybe I can just in 1 minute you conclude.
Right. So I think when we look at the women bhakti poets, particularly, I mean, today's discussion has been on Andal and Mahadevi Akka. It's important to keep in mind how we are looking at not these poets in isolation. They may come from different states and different contexts, but there is something that can be seen which is common to all of them, and that is a desire for expression and a desire to seek love and seek a kind of being, a kind of life that is free of strictures, and they all, of course, as I said, seek it in their union with the divine. But this element of expression is something that remains common to all of them, and they can be seen as very bold women who make their utterances and who express what they have to say. And this is how I would like to conclude on Andal and Mahadevi Akka also.
Well, Dr. Payal Nagpal, you have made some seminal points about Bhakti poetry, and I was struck particularly by the range of and the scope of the discussion, and it was focused on Andal and Mahadevi Akka, but references to the other lectures that you gave earlier, Lal Ded and Meera, they also came to mind today. And viewers, we can see that Bhakti movement was not confined to one region in the country. It was there in Kashmir, it was there in Rajasthan, it was there in Karnataka, and it was there in Tamil Nadu. So, the range is so wide, the geographical sweep is so wide that the entire country seems to be covered by this kind of trend that the poetry of that time adopted. The points made by Dr. Nagpal are basically concerning the assertion of the sensuous, the assertion of the body, and the assertion of understanding. So, in a way, the way of knowing things can be that which is based on what you see, what you perceive with the help of senses, and what you interpret with the help of the mind. In that sense, the Bhakti poetry becomes a comprehensive attempt to understand the world around us. And very rightly, Dr. Payal Nagpal has also pointed towards the social structures that control, that press upon individuals and compel them to fall into the norm. And then these people on their side struggle to break free from those restrictions. So it's a great lecture, very, very scintillating, and viewers and I've been also benefited by the discussion. And thank you so much. And viewers, you are welcome to ask questions later also, and you can communicate to the speakers through the organizers here, CEC. Thank you.